Stand up.
Hello, and welcome to the Monday Show. I hope you had a good weekend. I have got the great Tim Wise joining me today. If you want to skip ahead, that conversation begins at about 45 minutes into today's show. I've got a very long opening segment. If you want to skip ahead, it's about 44 minutes. But I hope you'll stay right here with me, go through the news and all the other things I've got to offer you here at the top. In the first segment of the show, I hope you had an awesome weekend. I did. I got outside, I touched grass, I touched leaves, I went down a trail. I'd never been down near the Hudson River with my dog, and it was a wonderful Sunday morning. Also, of course, did the audience warm-up at HBO's Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. Great episode last night. If you haven't been watching that show, it is so good. I learned so much from each and every show. Such an honor to be a small part of it. Anyway, I came back, got to work here on the show and all of the things I'm trying to produce for you in this last week before the election. Just 8 days to go if you're listening on Monday, and I am going to be as positive as I can for you this week here on the podcast. I'm going to bring on as many guests and voices as I can, the regulars that you trust and feel are credible to talk about the issues that we're dealing with each and every day, and probably a few that you haven't heard from. I'll be hosting a Hangout Thursday and maybe a bonus Hangout or two. I'll be very active on the Discord chat this week and trying to be as present as I can with our community in these final days before we elect the very first woman to be the president of the United States of America. And you know what? Right here at the top, I'm going to play some Michelle Obama because this 6 minutes or so was just about the most important, most well-written, thought out, and perfectly performed parts of a longer speech that I have heard from any person in all of politics. And that includes, everyone, including her husband. Headlines after this.
That there are a lot of angry, disillusioned people out there, upset with the slow pace of change. And I get it. It is reasonable to be frustrated. We all know we have a lot more work to do in this country. But to anyone out there thinking about sitting out this election or voting for Donald Trump or a third-party candidate in protest because you're fed up, let me warn you, your rage does not exist in a vacuum. If we don't get this election right, your wife, your daughter, your mother, we as women will become collateral damage to your rage. To look into the eyes of the women and children you love and tell them that you supported this assault on our safety? And to the women listening, we have every right to demand that the men in our lives do better by us. We have to use our voices to make these choices clear to the men that we love. Our lives are worth more than their anger and disappointment. And we are more than just baby-making vessels. And if you are a woman who lives in a household of men that don't listen to you or value your opinion, just remember that your vote is a private matter. Regardless of the political views of your partner, you get to choose. You get to use your judgment and cast your vote for yourself and the women in your life. Remember, women, standing up for what is best for us can make the difference in this election. So let us use our voices in these final days to make it plain to the men in our lives that we need to stand not with Trump, but with us. We need them to vote for the only candidate in this race who will protect our lives. We need them to vote for Kamala Harris. Kamala, she will fight to restore our reproductive freedoms and defend our health. Kamala will fight for our access to life-saving emergency care and maternal care in every state. Kamala will veto any abortion ban or bill that restricts access to contraception or IVF. Kamala will expand access to birth control and abortion pills. And she will do all of this not because she's a woman, but because she's a decent human being. She will do this because she cares about the lives of people other than herself. And that's really what this election is about, Michigan. This isn't just about what we have an obligation to say no to. It's about what we have the opportunity to say yes to. And we can elect someone who has the experience, the character, and the strength to look at all these challenges and still see a brighter day on the other side. Kamala Harris will see us, all of us. Kamala Harris will listen to us, all of us. She will protect our freedom. She'll stand up for all of our lives. She will have our backs for the folks trying to get ahead and those just trying to get by. And in doing so, she will usher in a new generation of American leadership and send the ugliness of Donald Trump and his politics back where it belongs, the past. But Michigan, she cannot do any of this alone. So I'm asking you one last time. Let us not just sit around and complain. Let's do something. If your brother or your son or boyfriend needs to hear your perspective, are you willing to talk to them? Are you willing to send a video of what I've just said? Are you willing to do something? If you have an aunt who's thinking about sitting this one out or voting for a third party, are you willing to have an uncomfortable conversation? Are you willing to do something? If you have an extra hour or extra weekend, are you willing to knock on doors and talk to your neighbors? Are you willing to do something? Look, Michigan, we've just got 10 more days to make it happen. 10 more days to wave goodbye to the incompetence and hatred and division. 10 more days to welcome in a leader with the character and the heart and the strength worthy of the office she seeks and worthy of the country that we all love. Michigan, let's give Kamala everything we've got. Can we get this done? Can we get this done, Michigan? We need you. Every last one of you. Get this done. Get this done. And now, it is my pleasure to welcome to this stage the next President of the United States, Kamala Harris.
Oh, yeah. Very good stuff from Michelle Obama, the former First Lady, introducing Kamala Harris, Michigan, on, I think that was Saturday night. Yeah. And, of course, she was also in Texas with Beyonce. Why was she campaigning in Texas? We'll get to that and more in the headlines. So let's get to it. Just love to read an email or any listener correspondence. A friend, Kim in Iowa, said, loved the show with Jon Carroll over the weekend. It was so good. You absolutely killed this week. You asked about who we want to hear from, so I thought I'd send over my guest suggestions if available. And Kim wants to hear from Catherine Rampell, Christine Romans, the ladies of the Hue, the author of They Came for the Schools, Mike Hixenbaugh, Glenn Kirshner, and maybe a show with Dean Obeidallah and John Fugelsang like the olden times would be fantastic. And then she says, I just can't get enough of the show and of the content, Pete. I'm almost sad when the show's over because I want it to be longer. I don't want the conversations to end. You got it, Kim. Very encouraging email. Very grateful to you. And gratefulness, by the way, I think is the antidote to depression and anxiety. Think about what you are grateful for. Come up with a list every day. Write it down. Do it in a meditation. Do it while you're driving. Think about the little things that you're grateful for every day. I think it's most effective in beating back the darkness that can overcome us at times and will. So that is my tip of the day, my mental health tip of the day. Look into, read about, and learn more about gratefulness, journaling, and all the rest. If you see it, listen to it, and I'll be interviewing someone after the election, no matter the outcome, about that issue because it's really working for me. And I like to share what works for me. Okay, let's get to those headlines and then the plethora of sound clips that I gathered for you from the weekend. Okay, let's start in the Middle East, where Israeli forces killed at least 53 people in Gaza, 21 people in Lebanon on Sunday, as the head of the UN, Antonio Guterres, expressed shock at the harrowing levels of death, injury, and destruction in besieged northern Gaza. Egypt has proposed a limited 2-day ceasefire in Gaza to exchange 4 Israelis for Palestinian prisoners as negotiations to end the year-long war resumed in Qatar's capital of Doha. Antony Blinken, President Biden's Secretary of State, said U.S. and Israeli negotiators would soon return to Qatar to try to revive talks with Hamas, but a quick ceasefire deal seems unlikely, apparently, according to the Secretary of State. Oh, also, Israel bombed Iran over the weekend, if I'm going back to Friday. Apparently, Israelis' retaliatory strike against Iran took out a critical component in Iran's ballistic missile program. A senior U.S. official confirmed that the strike crippled Iran's missile production capability. Israeli sources said the attack also hit 4 S-300 air defense batteries that were in strategic locations and protected Tehran and nuclear energy facilities in Iran. President Biden told reporters Saturday that the Israeli strike only hit military targets in Iran and that he hopes it'll be the end of an exchange of attacks between Israel and Iran. And so hopefully they've gotten even Steven with each other and they can stop fighting for at least a little while. Maybe, until the election. The other big news on Friday, I guess, is that the disgraced former president sat down with Joe Rogan, and they talked for apparently 3 hours, and I didn't really see a lot of headlines. I read a few of those, takeaways from the interview. I haven't heard it. I saw a couple of the clips. I did see CNN's Daniel Dale fact-checked 33 things that Trump got wrong or lied about in the interview, but I'm not sure how much it matters. I know it made him late for his rally, which pissed people off, but the really big deal for him over the weekend was the Madison Square Garden rally, which arguably was the most compelling case against Trump and MAGA ever made in one place at one time, said David Rothkopf on the Twitters. He also wrote that Republicans were right to say it was unfair to compare Trump's Madison Square Garden to the 1939 Nazi rally that also took place there. Unfair to the Nazis, he said. Sure, they were repulsive, anti-Semitic, and anti-American, but they seem positively circumspect compared to Trump's raging racist hate fest. Seth Abrahamson wrote, "This is not like a Nazi rally. It's a neo-Nazi rally. Your friends who are black, Latino, Jewish, women, gay, transgender, union, Muslim, disabled, members of any vulnerable minority are watching what you do today. Are you speaking up about this?" Ruth Ben-Ghiat tweeted, "Violence, misogyny, and racism are now the brand of the GOP. This is the hypothesis of Trump's fascistic use of rallies to radicalize followers. They will be ready to follow the leader and commit violence on his behalf." And back to Rothkopf, who was where I started, said, "I've watched film of the 1939 Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden. This Trump rally is, in terms of racism, misogyny, offensive rhetoric, and lies, worse, much worse." At this point, you probably know that comedian Tony Hinchcliffe said of Puerto Rico, "There's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. I think it's called Puerto Rico." I'll play it for you coming up, but the reaction to that was harsh and swift. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, "You're opening for Trump, calling Puerto Rico a floating pile of garbage, Tony. 4,000 plus Puerto Ricans died under him. This isn't the Comedy Store. You're using your set to boost neo-Nazis like Marjorie Taylor Greene and stripping women's rights to the Stone Age. Your, quote, sense of humor doesn't change that." The Knicks and Rangers should refuse to play at Madison Square Garden until it's been fumigated. That's back to Rothkopf again. But the things that were said at that rally last night, if you haven't heard, speaker to Trump's rally called Kamala Harris the Antichrist, the devil, called Hillary Clinton a sick son of a bitch, railed against, quote, fucking illegals, referred to Puerto Rico as a floating island of garbage, as I said Palestinians are on the side of terrorists. I mean, and that's not even part of it. Rex Chapman tweets, "Trump's losing. The GOP knows it. Can't win. That's why they all have these extremists speaking at Madison Square Garden today. The sole purpose of this rally is to rile up the people they think may become violent and hopefully riot for them post-election. Nothing more. It's a hate fest." And one more reaction to it. As Trump's hate rally at Madison Square Garden descends further into racism and xenophobia, Cowardly newspaper owners who kept editorial boards from publishing presidential endorsements are looking approximately 1,000 times worse. Yes, indeed, and that brings us to the other big story over the weekend, which was that on Friday, we learned the Washington Post editorial page won't endorse a presidential candidate, ending decades of tradition. Jeff Bezos, the paper's billionaire owner, made the decision according to, well, the reporters at the paper. There's public outcry, including from myself. I canceled my Washington Post subscription. I did it. I was torn, and I didn't do it lightly, but I did it. And I can see arguments different ways, but that was a line for me. The Washington Post killed the endorsement of Vice President Harris. It had already been written claiming it'll no longer endorse presidential candidates. Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Post, ordered the endorsement spiked, apparently fearful of his Amazon contracts with the government being revoked if Trump wins. This comes on the heels of the Los Angeles Times owner doing the exact same thing earlier in the week. His name is Patrick Soon-Shiong. He's a biotech billionaire, and he needs something from the federal government, too. Approval for the products his company puts out on the market from the FDA. Already, columnist Michelle Norris and Fred Kagan have resigned, and people are saying we should be canceling Amazon, not Washington Post, and I agree with you. It's very hard to do that because people rely so much on Amazon, including me, but I'm definitely considering it. All right. In other news, a federal judge on Friday granted the Department of Justice request to block Virginia from systematically removing alleged non-citizens from the voter rolls this close to an election. U.S. District Judge ordered the state to stop its program immediately and restore the voter registrations of more than 1,600 people who were removed in recent months within 5 days. So that's good news. And here's more good news. Gas prices are falling fast, dipping below $3 a gallon in many parts of the country just before the presidential election. Ooh, that's good timing. Gas prices averaging $3.14 per gallon nationwide, within 8 cents of a 3-year low. They ranged from $2.70 to $2.90 per gallon throughout much of the Republican-leaning Sun Belt, according to AAA. I like to see that news. See, I'm being optimistic. And the Department of Justice got an interesting request on Friday. Congressman Jamie Raskin, Senator Ron Wyden asked the Justice Department to designate a special counsel to probe Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and former senior advisor, for potentially violating a federal law that requires, quote, certain agents of foreign principals who are engaged in political activities to publicly disclose their ties to a foreign principal. Sounds good to me. And apparently Chinese hackers targeted data from Trump and J.D. Vance's phones in an effort to gather intelligence. It's unclear whether they took or saw any data. Also, a former model accused Trump of groping her in front of Jeffrey Epstein in 1993. 2 of her friends corroborated her account. The Trump campaign denied it, and it was like nothing even happened because 26 other women have credible accounts and have been on the record. So I think the one that seemed a little bit different about this, because I read a bit about it, was that he was hanging out with Trump, Jeffrey Epstein, and she were hanging out, and Epstein said, let's go over to Donald Trump's house. And I mean, that's how close Epstein and Trump were. They really were good friends, so it's shockingly unsurprising. And finally, I thought it was interesting and important that Vice President Kamala Harris yesterday commemorated 6 years since the deadly shooting at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue. She made comments there yesterday. Wanted to make sure I mentioned that. Also, 2 new polls showed Kamala Harris leading Trump as the election is just 8 days away. Women continue to propel the vice president's candidacy. Her strength with female voters is fueling overall leads in the 2 national polls. Will you save us, women? We have to do our part. And I am, for my part, doing this podcast each and every day, and that brings me to the audio of other white guys needing to do their part. I thought this was really good, so let's get into those audio clips right now and start with white guy, one of the good ones, Daniel Vicente. He's a United Auto Worker leader and Working Family Party's member endorsing Kamala Harris. I thought this was powerful and good and great advice for the whites.
My members are tired of people talking out of both sides of their mouth. We're ready for a party that puts in work for working people, puts in legwork for working people. And the WFP does that every single day. Every couple of years, it seems to me that we're asking black people to save this country. In the last election cycle, we asked black women in Georgia, please save us. In this election, we're saying, dear black men in the suburban counties outside of Philly, please save us. If we're going to ask that every couple of years, it's a fair question to ask guys that look like me, start handling your boys. Start handling your boys. I look like I stormed the Capitol, but I did not. But I know a lot of guys who did, and fuck those guys. It's time for us to start calling these assholes out. The people that are threatening democracy are not black, they're not Muslim, they're not immigrants. It's dudes that look like me. We got to start calling these assholes out every single place that we find them, because fuck them. I believe in this country. I'm a veteran of this country. Waving a flag and screaming at immigrants don't make you a patriot. It makes you a fucking coward. This country, we are the true patriots because we don't hate everybody just because they're different. We got to get this. Listen, I'm not going to sit up here and be like, oh, my God, Kamala, hooray. I'm voting for her. I'm not happy about what they're doing in Gaza, in Lebanon. I'm not happy about what's happening. I'm married to a Palestinian. I am not happy about this. But we have two choices between a woman that we can work with or a fascist.
Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. I like that guy. Maybe I'll get him on the show. And now another guy I like, Ali Velshi, on his awesome show over the weekend, interviewed Marty Barron, doesn't give a lot of interviews, the former Washington Post editor, the former Boston Globe editor, and award-winning journalist, of course. And, you know, I'll let Velshi take it away and play it for about, I think, 3 minutes here. Of course, this is in light of the Washington Post not printing an endorsement for the first time as a result of their billionaire owner wanting to cover his bases in case Trump gets elected. I'll leave Velshi's intro on because the guy is pretty impressive.
Joining me now is Marty Barron. Newsrooms under his leadership have won 18 Pulitzer Prizes, including 11 with the Washington Post, for leading the coverage of some of the most important stories of our time, including the January 6th insurrection. His previous work at the Boston Globe covering the sex abuse scandal within the Catholic Church not only won awards, it was made into the Academy Award-winning film called Spotlight. Barron is the author of the book Collision of Power, Trump, Bezos, and the Washington Post, a book that is very relevant to what we're talking about today. Marty, good to see you. Thank you for being on the show this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Marty, you don't do a ton of press. You don't comment on everything that goes on out there. So when you speak, journalists pay attention because it means something. There are a good number of people out there who perhaps do not understand the relationship between the owner of a newspaper, the publisher, and the editorial board and the reporter. So give us a little bit of insight into that relationship and what it means for the owner and the publisher of the Post to have blocked an endorsement of Kamala Harris that was basically prepared.
Well, at a place like the Washington Post, there's a division between the opinions department and the news department. I was in charge of the news department. That's a pretty traditional setup at many American newspapers. So I wasn't involved in the opinions. But my concern here is that are the circumstances of this decision to not publish an endorsement. Every newspaper can decide whether it wants to issue political endorsements or not. If this decision had been made 3 years ago, 2 years ago, a year ago, fine. They can decide whether they want to issue endorsements for president or any other political office. But this was a decision that was announced 11 days before the election. It was not a decision made in consultation with the editorial board. It was a decision that, according to the Post itself, its own reporting, that was made by Jeff Bezos, and the circumstances are just highly suspect. So that's my concern here, and that's why I'm speaking out. Normally, if I were at the newspaper, I wouldn't be involved in these decisions, of course, but I felt it was important to speak out in this instance.
So I want to try and examine what, without you knowing or me knowing what the reasons are. There are a couple of ideas out there. Timothy Snyder talks about this concept of obeying in advance, right? Worrying about what Trump may do when he becomes president and doing the things that protect your interests. On the other hand, there is a potential business issue here that may be that Jeff Bezos and the publisher of the LA Times or the owner of the LA Times are preserving potential business interests. Do the distinctions matter as to which one it is? Because obey in advance feels really bad in a democracy. Media owners having business interests, we're a little more familiar with.
Sure. Well, I don't know exactly what the circumstances were here, but as I said, the circumstances are highly suspect. This was not a decision that was made a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, or anything like that. The fact is that Jeff Bezos does have business interests. Of course, Amazon and then Blue Origin, his space company, they have contracts with the government. I was proud that during my time at the Post and during Jeff Bezos' ownership, during that entire period, he resisted pressure from Donald Trump. Trump tried to undermine Amazon's business. He said he was going to do that. He threatened to increase postal rates. double them, triple them, quadruple them. He did intervene in a $10 billion Defense Department cloud computing contract to ensure that it did not go to Amazon. Bezos stood up to that. He let us do our work with full independence. He let the opinions department do their work as well. They actually wrote 2 editorials against Trump's campaign for the presidency, first in 2016 and then in 2020, when a question was raised as to whether they would actually write an editorial in 2016. Bezos said, well, why would we not issue an editorial endorsement? And they went ahead and did so. So I see this as a betrayal of the core principles of the Post and also a betrayal of the practices and the principles that Bezos himself professed during my time at the Washington Post. I wrote about that in the book, how he stood up for us. I was very proud of that. I was very grateful for that. But this is something different.
All right, let me get through some of these awful clips from the Nazi riot at Madison Square Garden last night. I won't play nothing long, just a few clips just to give a taste, and then we'll get back to the more inspiring stuff and to my conversation with Tim Wise, which is, of course, excellent as always. There were like 30 speakers. They all did just a few minutes, of course, but just some of the names you recognize. Senator J.D. Vance, Speaker Mike Johnson, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, Congressman Byron Donalds, former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. Rudy Giuliani was there. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Lara Trump, Eric Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Elon Musk, Dan Scavino, Stephen Miller, Dana White, Tucker Carlson was there and was really, really awful as always. Then a bunch of names you've never heard from, including comedian Tony Hinchcliffe, or Kill Tony, who is widely respected in the circles of comedians, especially in Joe Rogan's whole group of guys. Lives down there now in Austin near Rogan with a bunch of those other comedians. Program last night filled up Madison Square Garden. I'm not sure how many people were there, but it seems like the one comment that got the most attention, or the comments that got most attention, were from that comedian Tony Hinchcliffe. Let's just go to those real quick. First, of course, here he is with the Puerto Rican joke.
A lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico. Okay. All right. Okay. We're getting there. Again, normally I don't follow the national anthem, everybody.
Yeah, that's just one of the hilarious jokes by Tony Hinchcliffe. And if that wasn't funny enough, it got the most attention, I guess, because there's so much anti-black racism, we almost don't comment on it as much anymore. But there was also this hacky, awful, stupid clip.
All right. Heck yeah. It's a cool black guy with a thing on his head. What the hell is that? A lampshade? Look at this guy. Oh, my goodness. Wow. I'm just kidding. That's one of my buddies. He had a Halloween party last night. We had fun. We carved watermelons together. It was awesome.
Oh, okay. Well, just a watermelon, black people eating watermelon joke. Nothing to see here at all. No big deal. And then there was Dr. Phil, of course.
By the way, we didn't choose the name for that by random. Merit Street Media. This country was built on hard work, added value, and talent, not on equal outcome, not on DEI. This country was built on hard work.
Oh, such a dipshit. And a lot of people making the observation that he became famous because of a black lady. Yeah, thanks, Oprah. And here's the 10 seconds that I'll play of the disgraced former president, because a lot of people were talking about what is he referring to here? What secret does he have with Speaker Mike Johnson, who he was apparently talking to at Madison Square Garden with this comment last night?
And I think with our little secret, we're going to do really well with the House, right? Our little secret is having a big impact. He and I have a secret. We'll tell you what it is when the race is over.
Yeah, when the race is over. Yeah, he's never giving up on the race. A lot of people speculating on what that little secret might be. I'm not sure, so I'm going to move on to what I've got next, which is me giving a preview to the Australian audience for their morning show in Australia. I was on again last night, and they wanted to talk about this rally and the campaign. Here is about 4 minutes of me on Today Extra with my best friend David Campbell and his co-host Sylvia.
Welcome back. 9 days out from the US election, and Donald Trump is preparing to take the stage at Madison Square Garden, where he'll make a final pitch to voters, despite New York being a Democratic stronghold.
For the latest, let's bring in US political commentator Pete Dominic in New York. Pete, let's start where you are. I think J.D. Vance is now on stage. He's currently speaking. So what time can we expect to see former President Trump?
I have no idea what time he gets on. Probably after the next racist, misogynist speaker, and then he'll probably speak for 2 hours until his supporters there, his sycophants, start walking out of Madison Square Garden, where David Rothkopf, who is a good friend and journalist of mine, and also Jewish, he tweeted, "I've watched the film of the 1939 Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden. This Trump rally is, in terms of racism, misogyny, offensive rhetoric, and lies, worse, much worse, David, Sylvia. It's bad in there."
Wow.
I just wish sometimes you'd tell us what you really think, Pete. You know, you just beat around the bush, and it's so
Real
annoying.
fence to this election.
Tell us, though, what do you expect to hear from Donald Trump? I know it's very hard to predict what someone like Donald Trump will say, but what does he need to do in these final days if he wants to win?
Well, I don't know what he needs to do, what he can do at this point, Sylvia. I mean, he's in Madison Square Garden where they just insulted Puerto Ricans in the worst kind of way. There's 500,000 Puerto Rican Americans in the state of Pennsylvania, which he desperately is trying to win. And he just had a guy opening for him saying that Puerto Rico is like an island of garbage. He's losing votes each day. This is terrible. This whole rally is very symbolic. He has no chance of winning New York. 4 of the 5 Republicans who are running in New York won't even show up there because he's so unpopular in New York. And this is his way to run against cities, urban areas where there's a lot of diversity. So whatever he needs to do, I don't think he's doing it. He's doubling down on fear and hatred, Sylvia, and that's what we're getting to see in these last few days. More of the same.
Well, then on the weekend we saw, Vice President Harris. She was leaning on some serious star power. She basically joined Destiny's Child this weekend. Let's talk about the fact that she was in Texas. Beyonce was there. It seemed big. I didn't know that state was on the cards. Why was that an important stop for her?
Guys, I just, you can make fun of me after the election if I'm way wrong. But I think that even though the polling here in the U.S. is very tight, getting out the vote is the only thing that matters. Are people voting? Early voting is showing some pretty interesting statistics and probably advantages for her. Texas could be in play, at least in their Senate seat with Colin Allred over the despicable Ted Cruz. Florida could even be play. Again, after the election, if I'm wrong, never have me on again and make fun of me as usual. But she's campaigning in places that she actually might have a shot. They have a lot of money. They're spending as much as they can in these last few days, Campbell. And Michelle Obama spoke over the weekend. She was also very exciting.
Okay, so what will be the deciding factors in the final days of this race?
Get out the vote. Will we be able to motivate our voters to get out and actually vote? Making sure nobody stays home. Make sure everybody has a ride. Making sure if you can vote early in many states, 15 or most states now, you can vote early. So it's about the volunteer work. It's about all gas, no brakes between now and the election. People who care about this, like myself, will be doing everything we can to turn out our voters to support Kamala Harris, in my opinion, and against what is Trump's own people's words, fascism. That's the future here if she loses, in my opinion.
Well, we would never, ever, take advantage of, if anything goes wrong next week with the election or whatever your words you say now are not correct next week, we would never, ever make fun of you, except never. I am dressing up as you for Halloween.
I mean, good luck finding the right skin tone bald cap.
Not easy. Not easy to do.
We love you, buddy. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me, you guys.
See you soon. Still to come on today.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, guys.
Empowering breast.
All right, there I go. Wasn't that fun? Was that fun? Did you enjoy that? I hope you enjoyed that. I always love doing that show and having fun with my friend from all the way down under and giving them the deep skinny as to what the hell is happening here in America from my neck of the woods, my point of view. All right, I know this is a long opening clip, but I always give you the option to skip ahead and get to the interview if you want. But I got a few more clips for you, including about 4 minutes of Beyonce in Houston, in Texas, on Friday night, introducing Kamala Harris. I like it. I'm sharing it.
H-Town.
to be standing here on this stage as proud country Texas women supporting and celebrating the one and only Vice President Kamala Harris. A woman who's been pushing for what this country really needs right now.
I paid
Unity.
no attention to that.
It's impossible not to feel the energy in this room, the positivity, the community, the humanity.
Lost.
We are at the precipice of an incredible shift, the brink of history. I'm not here as a celebrity.
Didn't ever turn a TV on.
I'm not here as a politician. I'm here as a mother. A mother who cares deeply about the world my children and all of our children live in. A world where we have the freedom to control our bodies. A world where we're not divided. Our past, our present, our future merge to meet us here. Imagine our daughters growing up seeing what's possible with no ceilings, no limitations. Imagine our grandmothers. Imagine what they feel right now. Those who have lived to see this historic day. Even those who are no longer physically with us. Imagine all of their sacrifice. The sacrifices made so we can witness the strength of a woman standing in her power, reimagining what leadership is. For all the men and women in this room and watching around the country, we need you. Your voice has power and magnitude. Your vote is one of the most valuable tools, and we need you. Your freedom is your God-given right, your human right. Everybody say Texas. Texas plays a pivotal role to change the course of our future. Texans and Houstonians from 3rd Ward, River Oaks, Sugarland, 5th Ward, Ailey, Memorial, Southwest Side, North Side, all the way down to Most City. We all have a role to play to make this a reality. We're all part of something much bigger. We must vote. And we need you. It's time to sing a new song. A song that began 248 years ago. The old notes of downfall, discord, despair no longer resonate. Our generations of loved ones before us are whispering a prophecy, a quest, a calling, an anthem. Our moment right now, it's time for America to sing a new song. Our voices sing a chorus of unity. They sing a song of dignity and opportunity. Are y'all ready to add your voice to the new American song? Because I am. So let's do this, ladies and gentlemen. Please give a big, loud Texas welcome to the next President of the United States, Vice President Kamala Harris.
Yeah, Kamala Harris, introduced by Beyonce in Texas. Wow, it must have been pretty cool to be a part of that audience. The energy, the electricity at these rallies is really something else. And now let's go back to last week real quick, because I got two clips that I just found, and I hadn't heard them, so I wanted to share them. First, another one of Tyler Perry and then Samuel Jackson. I just thought this was powerful and inspiring. I wanted to share it with you.
I'm closing here. I just want to talk about that quilt that I used to wrap up in my grandmother's car, that quilt that my grandmother gave me. That quilt was a tapestry of beautiful pieces, but I completely ignored it. I didn't think it was worth anything because she had made it from all of these stitches and gave it to me as a gift. And I was walking past this antique store years later, and I saw one in the window, and I go, wow, that's a beautiful quilt. It reminds me of my grandmother. So I walk in, I talk to the lady. She started explaining to me that each patch in that quilt was worth this and meant this because of the woman who made it. So when I think about America, I think about my grandmother's quilt. We are all shapes, sizes, and colors, but we are one. And it was so important for me to stand with a candidate who understands that we as America, we are a quilt. And I could never stand with a candidate who wants America to be a sheet.
Oh, damn. Audience just figuring out what he meant there. Catching on.
So today, I voted for Kamala Harris. And Georgia, it was only about 11,400 votes that separated Trump and Biden. So every vote counts.
There you go, Tyler Perry. And now here's Sam Jackson also at that rally.
She's running on a proven track record of fighting for the people, standing up to bullies, protecting the most vulnerable, and taking on the toughest fights. And we've heard her favorite curse word is a favorite of mine, too. But I ain't gonna say that word. But I don't know about you, but that's the kind of president I can stand behind. That's the kind of president I can see leading our country forward.
All right, there you go, Sam Jackson at that rally as well. Now, Van Jones, I know most of you don't like Van Jones, but I thought this was an interesting comment on Real Time with Bill Maher that I wanted to share.
But here's the thing that nobody's talking about. And then Donald Trump got worse. Everybody talks about this project 2025. He says that that's not his project. You know what? Donald Trump never lies. So I believe him. I believe him. I believe him. I believe him. So, what he's actually on record, so it's actually on record for something called Agenda 47. That's his agenda that he signed off to. It's on his website. What does it say about these issues? Point number 2. President Trump will require local law enforcement agencies.
This is Project 2025?
No, this is Agenda 47. This is literally what Donald Trump has signed on to.
Oh, I see.
So, because he never lies. He says he's not for that other thing. So this is what's on his website. He says he's going to have, require local law enforcement to do stop and frisk, which is basically 80% goes against black people. He says he's going to instruct the DOJ to dismantle every street gang. In other words, the feds are going to be in your neighborhood trying to figure out which one of your kids should go to federal prison. He says he's going to indemnify all cops, so you can't sue cops. Basically, black men are about to get conned, those who are going to do this vote. The best con artist in the world is going to tell black men, I'm going to lift you up. And in fact, he's going to lock you up. He's going to lock you up for the stuff that Kamala Harris is trying to decriminalize. He's going to actually recriminalize Donald Trump.
All right. There you go, Van Jones on Real Time with Bill Maher. And finally, Tim Walz for you. And then we will jump into my interview with the great Tim Wise. Tim Walz, Tim Wise. Here we go.
All right. One final thing on this. Every day, this guy is something else as he descends into this madness that he's going on. Trump's now been going around on the campaign trail calling America the garbage can of the world. A direct quote. This country that so many died protecting, that is the beacon of the world on democracy and human rights, he calls it the garbage can of the world. That is so pathetic and unpatriotic that it's almost unbelievable. So look. He is literally trash-talking this country now, every single day. So it doesn't get simpler. And let's start naming it where it is. Donald Trump hates this country, and everything he does is for Donald Trump. So just say it. His words. Let me give Kamala Harris's words. She believes America is the greatest country on earth, and it's that simple.
All right, Tim Walz, and now it's time to get to my conversation with Tim Wise. 45-minute opening segment. I hope it was worth it. I hope you liked it. Recapping the weekend in clips. It was a hell of a weekend. I wanted to give you as much as I could. Be here with you for almost 2 hours today. So thanks for hanging out with me. I so appreciate your support. I can't do the show without it. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic if you want to support the show, where I will be here each and every day for you that I possibly can. And I really hope that Kamala Harris wins, and I hope she wins big so I can take a few days off and go fishing or something. I don't know. Deep into the woods. All right, let's get to the great Tim Wise, who I caught up with on Friday. Tim is now a senior fellow at the African American Policy Forum. He is a widely sought after speaker and highly respected writer. You can learn more about Tim and follow him on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Threads. Get all of his books. He is really one of the best. I love talking to him, and it was great catching up. Everybody loves him. He's one of the best, and today was no exception. Let's do it right now with the always very passionate, very powerful, smart, hilarious Tim Wise. Tim Wise joins me now. Thank you for doing this with me, as always. I really appreciate any time you have for us.
Oh, you bet. Thanks for having me back, as always.
You can talk, obviously, about what you're an expert on and have written so many books about, as good as anybody, but you can talk about everything. And I want to get you to weigh in on a few things. Of course, when it comes to journalism, I always want to get your take and the way media, the direction media is taking and how and why we cover things. The LA Times and the Washington Post have both decided not to endorse a candidate for president. Both newspapers are owned by billionaires. This feels to me like a giant moment that these two newspapers are not endorsing a candidate. And I don't know how to quantify it with everything else that's going on, but I raise it up and I ask you about it first because that's the priority I'm giving it. What about you?
Yeah, it's a horrifying sign. The Washington Post slogan is democracy dies in darkness, but clearly, as far as they're concerned, it can just die in supine cowardice because for them to not endorse says that the one, or at least one of the biggest remaining checks and balances on authoritarianism, on creeping fascism, is willing to remain silent in the face of that, right? Because if Donald Trump, in fact, wins in a week or so, whenever I get around to posting this interview, if he wins, the reality is that it is going to require not just a free press, but an aggressive press to hold the line and to make sure that he doesn't do some of the worst of the things that he fantasizes about and that Steve Bannon fantasizes about and that Stephen Miller fantasizes about and that J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel and all these guys fantasize about. So if you're going to fold up and go home, I have to wonder what that's about. And there are really only two possible interpretations, and neither one of them are good. The one that doesn't make sense is that this is a business decision. It's not. MAGA people are not going to go suddenly subscribe to the Washington Post because they didn't endorse anybody, or the LA Times because they didn't endorse anybody.
Right.
Those folks are not going to go get a subscription unless you endorse their guy. Now, if you want to endorse Trump, they'll go buy subscriptions. But they obviously weren't going to do that. So by not endorsing at all, you're not going to get the Trump people to buy your paper. And you're going to lose a bunch of subscriptions. Whether that's a good strategy or not, they're going to lose a bunch of subscriptions from LA Times subscribers and Washington Post subscribers. So you're not going to make any money with this decision, except insofar as you can keep dear leader happy if he wins and perhaps not be the subject of his anger, resentment, and backlash. They are either trying to protect themselves to somehow curry favor with him, or as billionaires, they've finally decided, fuck it, we're just going to do class war. And we're going to go all in with the guy who's one of us, right? Because at some point, these billionaires do close ranks and decide we're going to do what's good for us. And so if Elon's on board and Peter Thiel's on board and all these other billionaires are on board, we might as well get on board too. Jeff Bezos probably afraid there's going to be some retaliation against Amazon. The LA Times guy, obviously, he's a billionaire. They're all protecting their personal bottom lines, not even the paper, but their personal bottom lines, and they're standing in the billionaire club. It is an indication that this election, maybe more than any in our lifetime, is one that is being literally and figuratively bought and paid for by rich folks.
What about the idea of access? They need to maintain access in a Trump administration, and he's going to shut them out because he's going to keep track of anybody who did not endorse him or criticize him. And none of them will have access. None of them will have access not only to the White House, but to any agency or any cabinet secretary or anyone. They'll be locked out, all of them. It's all about access.
But they had access the last 4 years, despite prior endorsements. They've had Maggie Haberman had constant access from the.
But maybe he wouldn't give it access this time. What would you?
I don't think Donald Trump can resist media enough to not give access. Donald Trump is a creature of media. The idea that he's going to say, no more interviews. I'm done. You didn't endorse me. I can't speak my mind to you. I don't want to run my mouth to you because you didn't endorse. No, he wants to run his mouth to everyone. So I don't think there's any chance of that at all.
So in this final stretch, it seems like we're hearing more mainstream. I'm thinking of Jake Tapper, but others as well, start to use the word fascism, a word that Timothy Snyder and Ruth Ben-Ghiat and other historians and experts in the history of authoritarianism had been using in 2015, Tim. But we have finally arrived just a week before the election at calling Trump a fascist. Kamala Harris has now called him a fascist. And, of course, he's called her a fascist, a communist socialist. He called that about Barack Obama and Joe Biden, and everybody's called it, so that shouldn't be too big of a deal. But what do you make of the media and the candidate coming to the F word, which was a big deal this week, of course, and I wanted to ask you about what we've heard from his former chief of staff, Jon Kelly. But the word fascist, we finally arrived a week ahead of time. A week ahead of the election.
I mean, better late than never. The problem with waiting this long to do it, and this is the thing, if you're not going to call a thing when the experts on the thing are calling it that years prior, then when you wait around and you do it at the last minute, it seems desperate. And it reads as desperate. And that actually ends up minimizing the importance of what fascism is and what this moment means.
Right.
I guess it's better late than never, but then there's part of me that says at this point it might have been better not to even say it, because if people read that as desperation, if they're like, oh, you're just trying to throw anything at the wall now, and so now you're all piling on calling him a fascist, even though you didn't call him that 6 months ago, you didn't call him that a year ago. Now, I don't think that's a very persuasive rebuttal, but you can imagine people buying it, right? Saying, why didn't you say that before? Same thing happened in Louisiana with David Duke, right? You had the media that did not, for the first year that he was running for first the state house, and then when he started running for the U.S. Senate, the New Orleans Times-Picayune, the main paper there, did not want to really talk about him being a Nazi or a Nazi sympathizer. They were willing to mention he'd been in the Klan, of course, and he was the head of the Klan, but they didn't want to talk about the Nazi stuff. And they were afraid that it would give more attention to him, that it was somehow going to boost his support. And so they remained silent for a long time. By the time they finally got around to covering him the way that he should have been covered from the beginning, there were a lot of people in Louisiana that wouldn't believe the criticisms now, because they said, if that were true, if he were really that bad, you would have said that a year ago, right? If he were really that bad, you would have said that 15 months ago. So you must just be some partisan hack. It must be fake news. You must be exaggerating. And so I fear that this slow walking to the definition is going to do the same thing. It's not going to end up persuading anyone. Now, maybe that's okay if it can mobilize the Harris voters or Harris-leaning voters to make sure they get out and vote. There can still be value to it. But if anyone thinks that it's really going to make a difference, if the Harris campaign thinks that there's a bunch of undecided voters out there who don't know what they're going to do yet, but they hear Jon Kelly say he's a fascist and go, oh, Jon Kelly said it, or oh, Liz Cheney said it. The Cheneys are upset now. Like, the undecided voters don't care about that. So I'm glad that they're seeing what the rest of us saw. But at some point, you can't be the last one to notice that the house is on fire. You have to recognize when the house is burning that it's burning, and it's not crying wolf or whatever to mention it 9 years ago or 4 years ago. So better late than never, I guess, but I don't think it's probably going to move the needle very much.
It's interesting to hear Jon Kelly in that interview with Michael Schmidt in the New York Times seemingly reading the definition of fascism from Wikipedia and then saying he agreed with it. And I want to do that with you right now. I'm just going to read what Wikipedia says. I think it's pretty good about what fascism is. And I want you to just jump in and tell me how he actually did this 4 years ago, and obviously how it would be worse in 4 more years. So just jump in anytime. Fascism is a true or false, I guess. Fascism is a far-right, authoritarian, ultra-nationalist political ideology and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, belief in a natural social hierarchy, subordination of individual interests for the perceived good of the nation or race, and strong regimentation of society and the economy.
I was going to start putting up fingers every time you said one, but I would have run out of hands, right? There's every single one of those is either something that he's already manifested or something that he promises to manifest in a second term. Every single one of those things is either his existing governance in the first term or stuff that he has said he is going to do. The regimented control, the centralized control, that's right out of Project 2025. All of that stuff that he didn't get around to perhaps the first time, he is saying he's going to do this time. And yet people don't want to believe. And it's because we have this, Americans have this, white Americans, I should say, in particular, have this hagiographic understanding of our country as conceived without sin. We believe in immaculate conception for our nation, right? This idea that we were conceived without sin, and therefore we could never go down the road to these end points that other nations have gone to. But I beg to remind you that Germany was a very civilized country relative to much of the world, putting that in quotes, right? A very civilized place in terms of the way that we think of civilization, a very advanced place.
Yeah.
And they went to a darkness that no one thought was possible there either. Countries do that. The idea that we believe we are so special is evidence of our arrogance and our national narcissism and our almost religious devotion to this sort of patriotic remembrance of the country that doesn't bear any resemblance to the country Black people have lived in, the country that indigenous people have lived in, the country that the vast majorities of peoples of color and poor folks of all colors and women and LGBTQ folks have lived in. But because it is believed, even liberals want to believe that it isn't going to be that bad. It isn't going to be that. Surely it's not going to be that bad. And it didn't happen last time, so it won't happen this time. But as we know, the reason it didn't happen last time is that you had the Jon Kellys in the room. You had the Mark Millies in the room. You had the Espers in the room, the people who ultimately would put the brakes on his worst instincts. And they have been replaced. They've been replaced by people like J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel and these folks that are the whisperers of those individuals, Kash Patel and all these people. And, of course, Stephen Miller will be back at least at night when he rises from his crypt. Like, these people are all going to be back in the room. Steve Bannon will be out of jail, fresh from probably the only shower he's had in years because they make you shower in prison, I think. And then he'll be back to his old ways, wearing his fatigued army jacket, smelling of scotch and regret. And he'll be sitting there in the Oval Office advising Donald Trump on how to shoot people who go into the streets to protest. And he said he's going to do all that. That is textbook fascism. Every single way, it is textbook fascism.
I think you almost underplayed the idea that it wasn't that bad, that some people think it wasn't that bad the first time, because it was that bad. And we can easily make the case from COVID to the fact that he actually, this is the point I wanted to make to get your reaction to, it was that bad. And he actually did give orders to do all kinds of crazy things. They just were not carried out by the few remaining civilized people like H.R. McMaster or Milley or Jon Kelly or even, obviously, Mike Pence. That would be different this time around because he wants, and the litmus test will be, are you going to be loyal to the Führer?
And now that the courts have basically said he can do whatever he wants, there are literally no guardrails left other than civil society.
Very important.
And that means civil society, meaning the press, but now they seem, at least in many cases, to be taking a dive. That means the corporate leadership, but they're going to fall in line in many cases. They already are. They don't want to. They're more than happy to get whatever massive tax cuts Donald Trump is willing to give them. And they may not be excited about the prospects of these huge tariffs, but I have a feeling that they'll adjust to whatever kinds of tariffs Donald Trump's really actually able to get past, whatever those might be. The rest of civil society is going to have to stand up and take real risk, because this is a guy who is saying, if you protest, if people pour into the streets, not rioting, not burning things, just simply protesting. The people that he was ready to shoot in Washington, D.C. were not breaking windows. They were not rioting. Right. They were not burning anything. They were protesting peacefully, and he wanted to shoot them. So that's what, and my fear is you're going to have people who are going to be too afraid to go into the streets, too afraid to raise their voice because they understandably are worried that something like that's going to happen. But that is when democracy literally dies.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think people,
they're not going to stand up. And this is going to be a real gut check for people who tweet real badass stuff.
I think a lot
it's
of people.
It's going to be a gut check for people who like to talk. I'm talking about media talking heads and pundits and people that like to, all these Lincoln Project folks who we continue to venerate, even though, to be perfectly honest, they bear a lot of responsibility for how we got here. And I'm increasingly tired of seeing a bunch of people who worked for politicians that laid the groundwork for this man. They race baited Obama. They were behind Reagan. They were behind both Bushes. They were behind all of them. And now they're all big and bold. All right, let's see how big and bold they are when actual fascism is at the doorstep.
And they're all making, it would seem they're making pretty damn good money in this. Like there's a lot of people who talked about, if I turn away from Trump, I lose my whole radio audience. It was true, Charlie Sykes. But guess how much money? I'm sure Charlie Sykes has made a lot of money at the Bulwark. He just retired, I think. And plenty of the rest of these guys at these other outfits that you're talking about. I want to go back to fascism because I think this is a really important thing to mention that you've written and talked extensively about. But back to this Wikipedia definition, it says fascism's extreme authoritarianism and nationalism often manifests as a belief in racial purity or a master race, usually blended with some variant of racism or discrimination against the demonized other, such as Jews, homosexuals, transgender people, ethnic minorities, or immigrants. And Tim, it's so easy to focus on the long record of blatant racism, from not renting to black folks to the Central Park 5 to birtherism to shithole countries to every single day of this asshole's life. He likes the black people who like him, the rich ones, the athletes, the famous ones, the Herschel Walkers. But I think what we should talk more about and what should get more attention should be his comments. He's made them before, but most succinctly or most specifically in an interview with Hugh Hewitt, when he said that immigrants have bad genes. He said that crime is in their genes. I believe it's in their genes, and we have a lot of bad genes in our country right now. He said this to Hugh Hewitt, who I think you're familiar with, debated before. That comment to me is the definition of fascism, and saying racial purity and master race genes. I don't want to talk about anything but bad genes with you.
Right. And when I saw that quote, I went and I dug up, and I think I tweeted it out. I dug up the old quotes from David Duke, because he has a whole litany of quotes where he says functionally the very same thing, that civilization resides in the genes. And he, of course, had the same position, that the people that were coming into the country were bringing not bad culture, not bad, they don't speak English or they came illegally. It had nothing to do with the legal status or the culture or the language. It had to do with the belief that they would drag down the genetic quality of the country. This is, of course, what Hitler also believed about non-Aryans and particularly about Jews. It is what Donald Trump clearly believes. And keep in mind, this is a guy who openly used to talk about believing in the horse race theory, right? Of you breed good horses. He believes fundamentally in eugenics, which were the basis of Hitlerism and the basis of sterilization in this country. Over 100,000 women, disproportionately of color, were sterilized throughout the 20th century, indigenous and black women mostly, but also a lot of poor white women. And the courts of this country signed off on that because the whole idea was we need to stop breeding what they called imbeciles. I think the actual quote from whoever the judge was, the justice who wrote it, was 5 generations of imbeciles is enough or something. And that was how they justified. That was sterilizing a white woman, by the way, when they justified that. That's the kind of thinking that Donald Trump brings to the forefront. It is not simply conservatism. It is not simply, for the last 40 or 50 years, we got away from that biological racism a little bit. Now, the bell curve was still a bestseller 30 years ago. But for the most part, most people in polite society did not say things like that. They would instead pivot, right? They would say it's not that they're inherently inferior, but their cultures are not as good. And we have different cultures. Now, I would say that's just as racist. It's just putting a gloss on it. It's still racist. But they're not even doing that anymore. They're not even pretending it's about culture or that it's about language or that it's about legality or illegality. They are simply saying these people are inferior. That is the kind of stuff that leads not only to authoritarianism, that is the kind of stuff that leads to genocide, because it literally dehumanizes entire groups of people and suggests they are not worthy of life. And yesterday, just to give you an idea of the cruelty of this, Jesse Kelly, right, who's this right-wing podcaster and quote-unquote influencer, he tweeted out something in response to Mark Cuban. Mark Cuban had asked, what do you do? I'm paraphrasing, but there was a tweet. What do you do with a grandmother who's here undocumented, been here for 4 generations? She's got kids and grandkids. She's never even gotten a speeding ticket. What do we do with her? And Jesse Kelly responded, we kick in her door at midnight and we drag her out handcuffed, and we do it all on camera as a way to send a message to anyone whoever wants to come into my country and violate my country's sovereignty again. It's cruelty for its own sake. It's sadism. And you don't do that to people who you view as fully human.
But
you don't.
The problem,
people that you view as human, you might still have a hard line on immigration. You may take the position, and conservatives have for years, gosh, we just don't have enough room. It's straining our resources. I think there are responses to that, but at least that's an old school argument. It doesn't rely on bigotry necessarily. You could at least make that argument. You could at least say, we just don't have the money. We don't have the resources, da-da-da-da. No, Jesse Kelly is saying, make them hurt. Make them cry, make them miserable, show the world how cruel we can be. That is what people do who have already gone over the edge into fascism. And that's where we're headed if we don't stop this in a week.
And the frightening thing about it is that hypothetical and what he says. I know a lot of the MAGA people in my town that I have conversations with, at least on Facebook, would support that. They'd be okay with it. That's what's wrong. It's not just some extremist saying that on social media. He has a huge following, that guy. And a lot of people hear that and say, yes, I would be okay with that. They have no mercy or sympathy for that person. But going back to Trump's rhetoric, he's also called immigrants animals. He says they're not humans, they're animals, which of course is also echoing Hitler and others. And the MAGA person might say, he's talking about the murdering ones. And I don't think any humans are animals, even terrible people who do terrible things, because I think humans are more complex than that. But the point is, all immigrants, all migrants, all asylum seekers, all people that look different then get painted with this brush of animals. They'll try to split a hair and say he's talking about the really bad ones. What do you say with that kind of rhetoric of dehumanizing and how that influences people's thoughts and potentially actions?
Well, if that was what he meant, he could say that. He's had plenty of time to clarify it. He hasn't ever said that. He makes it very clear. When he's talking about deporting 20 million people, are there 20 million animals? No. Are you talking about the handful of people that are in some violent gang? Then you would say that. You would say, you know what? We're going to deport those people who are committing murder.
Which is what Kamala Harris actually did for a job. That was her job.
He could say that, but he is saying he wants to deport 20 million people, which, by the way, the best estimates are we have about 11 or 12 million undocumented people in the country. So if you're going to deport 20 million, where are you getting the other 8 to 9 million from? Where are you going to get that? They're not undocumented people. So what you're saying is you're going to deport their children who actually, if born in this country, have citizenship. So you're just going to go ahead and essentially expel them. You're going to expel people who are, in fact, documented, but they have a Hispanic surname. They don't speak the language that way. Maybe they don't have their papers on them. So you're going to expel them, and then hopefully it'll all work out and they'll have some type of administrative law judge that'll look at it a year later, 2 years later, when they've already been kicked across the border. He's not talking about the worst of the worst. And even if he was, I agree with you, there's never any point in dehumanizing language like that, because when you do that, you lower the threshold to violence against anyone who anyone suspects of being one of the quote unquote worst. Right. And if the only criteria you've given is that they're not from the United States and that they're brown and that they don't speak English as their principal language, you are encouraging people to assume the worst. Just this week in Tennessee, Marsha Blackburn, our senator, sent around a something on social media where she said that there was a gang of undocumented people that were looting a house that was damaged in the flooding. Come to find out, the house owner had asked these guys who were workers to go check on the house after the storm. But some neighbor saw these brown guys getting out of trucks, and I guess they were moving stuff around, maybe taking stuff out of the house that the owner wanted them to remove because of possible damage. And then that person contacts somebody who contacts Marsha Blackburn, and she says it's a bunch of illegals looting homes. So what was the criteria? The criteria was brown men. We don't know who they are, but you assume the worst about them. You assume that they're criminal. That's what's going to happen if this man is reelected.
It is happening. And the better example
now. It's happening now, and he's not even the president.
Springfield.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Literally getting bomb threats called in on the entire community, on the schools, threatening and terrorizing children. And then when asked about it, Donald Trump's answer was, I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about that.
Because of people who are here legally and working and being, by all accounts in Springfield, productive citizens. And of course, you take the one or two that ride a scooter into you. Some Haitian guy got in a car accident and killed a kid, and his white family is pissed that they're demonized Haitian people as a result. It's not because he was Haitian. And most of these people, we have to look at a population of people on a population level, but we never do that because it's so much easier to scapegoat any one person of any member, which I've learned a lot about from you. All right, so what do you think about the Harris campaign in these final days and how she's going to make a big speech this week and how she's handling media, how she's campaigning, who she's campaigning with? Do you think she's doing an impactful, great job, or would you criticize anything that she's doing? Some people are saying she's campaigning with too many Republicans. I don't criticize that. I think it's a good idea. If you're a left-wing progressive liberal and you're not fully out there supporting her because you don't like one thing or another, which there's plenty of not to like, I can't ride with you, I feel.
Oh, I agree with that part, but I don't think it makes any sense for her to be focusing so much on the bipartisan nature of people who support her, because I don't think that is going. First of all, who are you appealing to? This is what I don't think she's.
Well, that mayor in Wisconsin is a Republican. Like, she needs to win that state. Like, touting that guy.
I understand. But I'm not talking about the local. I think the local people are actually fine. I think this Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney, isn't this awesome? Who is she speaking to when she does that? Because I don't believe that there is a large group of Republicans who are just waiting to hear what the Cheneys have to say or Adam Kinzinger before they endorse and decide to vote for Kamala Harris.
But if there's 10,000,
hold on. I don't believe there are a lot of undecided people for whom that's going to make the difference. My guess is at this point, there aren't very many undecided people at all, to be honest. Right. And I'm not sure that if there are, there's any way to know what it would take to get them. Because if you're still undecided at this point, you don't understand inflation. You don't understand what causes gas prices to go up. You don't understand anything about anything. To be honest, I don't mean to be mean or cruel, but you just are a very low information voter who doesn't actually know anything about anything. So there's no way to know what Kamala Harris needs to say to you. But what I do know is that there are people out there who are within the core of the Democratic Party constituency who certainly are not going to go vote for Trump now, but when they see her parading around with Dick and Liz Cheney, it does not inspire them to get out and do anything. It doesn't inspire them to go knock on doors. It doesn't inspire. They may still go vote, but they're not going to try to encourage other people in the same way. I think it's demoralizing. So I don't see any point in it. I think she needs to be out there making the case as dramatically as possible for the people who were the core voters. This is going to be a turnout election. It is not going to be a conversion election. It is not going to be a get the undecideds. The reason it's not about conversion is, and I talked about this on Twitter today, is because you're not going to get people who voted for Donald Trump before this late in the game to admit they voted for a monster or that they were suckered. They're just not going to do it. David Duke kept 94% of his votes from 1990 to 91, even though they knew more about him the second time out. You're not going to get a lot of undecideds because I just don't think there are that many to get. What you have to do is you have to drive turnout. And one of the things, I work at African American Policy Forum, and one of the things we just commissioned a survey. We're releasing the study, the full results this week, but we've been talking about it for a full week up to this point. There's a research done by Hit Strategies, and what they found was that for black voters and for white liberal and progressive voters who are core to the Democratic turnout, without them, you don't win anything. They want a racial justice message. They want Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party to talk about the threats of Project 2025, specifically to civil rights enforcement, to the Department of Education, the impact it'll have on racial equity. And instead of doing that, the campaign and the party have run away from any conversation having to do with race for fear of upsetting the white people. The white people who actually ride with Democrats want them to do it. Yeah. And black folks most definitely want them to. So there's this great myth out there that you can't talk about race. You can. You got to talk about it in connection to class and economic need and jobs and prices and gas and all those things. There are ways to talk about race and class at the same time. But the problem is she hasn't been doing that. And when asked questions, she talks about, I was raised middle class, and starts talking about her mother again. And I think that was really nice the first week or two. But it does not work at the very end. You have to make a closing argument, which makes it seem, as we did in Louisiana, that if David Duke didn't lose, and in this instance, if Donald Trump doesn't lose, this country is not going to be recognizable in 4 years. Is that going to persuade people who aren't there yet? No. But it may scare the hell out of the people who have to be there. And that's what matters right now.
So, love it. Now, I want to get you really worked up here at the end. So I want to read an email from a listener tying into what you said. A couple times you mentioned David Duke as well as anybody because you worked against him in Louisiana as a young man, an activist, and you've written all about it, and people should go read your experiences because nobody's got more credibility on him or that time in the movement than you do. So this listener emails me and said, I forgot to mention, so David Duke has just come out and endorsed Jill Stein. Right. And so now I really want to get you triggered and upset because this email from a listener said, I don't know this guy. I've asked him to come on and talk with me about it, but He said, I'm a Michigan voter, and I just voted for Jill Stein.
Jesus.
And let me finish. I don't really understand some of the words he's saying here, but he says, the Democratic Party no longer gets my vote for free. They need to be separate from the uniparty duopoly on issues that really matter, like democracy reform, freedom of legal speech. I don't know what that quite means. And real support of promotion of sane warfare practices globally. He says the Democratic Party sucks. They largely do not support our real issues differently than Republicans. And don't say I'm throwing my vote away if I don't vote for a D or an R. I would challenge people to vote for who they like the most, no matter what.
That's like an 11-year-old. That's I'm sorry. I'm so done with these people voting for this busted up Joan Baez impersonator who runs every 4 years. And all she does is she doesn't do anything in between the elections, except I guess she's on she plays coffee houses with her guitar doing her Joan Baez impersonation, which she's tried to cultivate so well these last 12 years, whatever. She doesn't do anything. She doesn't build the Green Party. Green Party membership is down year over year, election cycle over election cycle, because she's not about that. She's about grifting. She's about padding her own sort of resume and her own ego. And meanwhile, this idea that the two parties are not different, Project 2025 isn't a plan that's going to be implemented by a Democrat. And hotels with the name Trump are not going to get built on the West Bank in Palestine if Kamala Harris wins. But if Donald Trump does, not only are the people of Gaza going to continue to die in a horrific way, most likely, but the Palestinians in the West Bank are going to get transferred too, because Netanyahu wants them all out, wants them all to go to Jordan, wants to ship all the Palestinians out. And Donald Trump has said, finish the job. So whatever this guy thinks, whatever these individuals think that somehow they're making a bold statement, we have a system and it sucks. And I agree. It is a two-party system where, unfortunately, you don't get good third, fourth, fifth parties. We need a multi-party system. We need ranked choice voting. We need a whole lot of things. We don't have them. In the real world, not the world of this person's imagination, not the world of fantasy, but in the real world, if Kamala Harris does not become president, Donald Trump will. That's the reality of the situation. And then I promise you, you're definitely not going to get any of your progressive prerogatives. You're not going to get Jill Stein. You're never going to get Cornel West. You're not going to get
clean water.
You're not going to get any of those things. You're not going to get any of the things that the individuals making that decision say that they want. It is a completely narcissistic, I want what I want, and by God, I won't compromise. And the person that sent you that email, I beg to remind you, said it on a computer made with slave labor, so he compromises with injustice every day. He had to compromise with injustice just to write that shit, just to send it to you. Right? He had to compromise with injustice to go to the polls because he probably drove there in a car that polluted using fossil fuel, or God forbid a Tesla, which put money in the hands of Elon Musk. But we compromise with injustice every day. There's no way not to in an unjust world. The question is, how do we minimize harm in an unjust world? And I find it precious that the one thing that people want to throw away their harm reduction mentality on, because we realize we realize that sometimes you got to eat food that probably is processed in an unhealthy way, and you got to wear clothes that are probably made in sweatshops because there may not be any other. We understand there are compromises we all end up making. But if the one compromise you won't make is the one that gets to determine who makes laws, what kind of statement is that? Like, you're going to keep wearing the tennis shoes made by slave labor. You're going to keep driving a car. You're going to keep using a computer. You're going to keep doing all of that, but you're just not going to vote. That is beyond ignorant. It is an abdication of democratic responsibility, small d, democratic responsibility, and responsible people shouldn't stand for it. Certainly not in the name of glorious revolution, right? The idea, I really think people like this think if it gets worse, then we'll all go in the streets, and it gets worse, it'll get better. No, first of all, that never happens in history. When it gets worse, it just gets worse.
Yeah.
And number two, if Donald Trump wins and then you want to go into the street to protest him, he's already said he's going to shoot you or jail you. So good luck with that. Good luck with that. It's not going to work. Never works.
Love it. Love it. And that's why I saved it for last. Tim Wise, the best. I will talk to you. If not, hopefully you'll stop by. I'm going to do some kind of marathon show on election day or the day before, some kind of therapy. But pop in and hold our hands, I hope.
That would be great, man.
All right, there he goes. Tim Wise, everybody. Go follow him, support him on all the social medias. Let him know that you heard him here, and hopefully he'll stop in on our marathon show whenever that's going to be in the last couple days before the election. I want to hold your hand. I want you to hold mine, because it is going to be a very long week, I think. Or not. I don't know. Depends on how you look at it. All right, that's it. That's all. I got to put this baby up so you can bring it down. It's like uploading, downloading. No, that's what I was referencing. And you bumblebees here at the end, thank you. You made it well over an hour today with me. Thank you very much for joining me. As always, I will talk to you tomorrow. Jon Carroll writes and performs all the music for this show. He is the best. Go support him, JonCarroll.org. Talk to you tomorrow.
Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand